The sun rose slow and heavy over the New Mexico horizon, bleeding light into the endless desert. Dust shimmered in the pale gold of morning, and the only sounds were the soft braying of cattle and the creak of a windmill turning lazily in the breeze. For years, this land had been nothing but peace for Jack Rains, a man who'd traded bullets for quiet, chaos for soil. His mornings were sacred. Feed the horses, check the fences, coffee on the porch while the world came alive. That morning should have been no different. Except peace has a way of drawing predators. Down the empty highway, far beyond the reach of small-town police and curious eyes, a convoy tore through the dust. 3 black SUVs, their engines snarling, windows tinted dark as night. Inside, men sat with rifles resting on their knees, tattoos peeking from their sleeves. They were cartel muscle, Ortega's men, sent to make an example out of some stubborn American who refused to sell his property. They called him El Viejo, the old man, and laughed when they heard he lived alone. Easy job, easy money, they thought. Miguel, El Lobo, Ortega didn't ride with them that morning. He didn't need to. His reputation was enough. Everyone in northern Mexico and half of southern New Mexico knew what happened when Ortega wanted land. He took it. He had men to handle the rest. The convoy's leader, a thick-shouldered man named Salazar, spit out the window and adjusted the pistol on his belt. In and out, he said to his crew, "No mess. Burn the barn if you have to." They left the main road, following a trail of dirt that snaked toward a patch of green, the Rains Ranch. It looked almost too small to matter. A worn-down barn, a single farmhouse, and a few grazing cows. To the men in the SUVs, it was laughable. To Jack Rains, it was everything. Salazar gave the signal as they neared the gate. The vehicles rolled to a stop, tires crunching gravel. The men got out, scanning the area with practiced care. There was no movement, no barking dogs, no sign of the owner. Just the whisper of the wind across the field. "Empty," one of them muttered. Salazar raised a hand and nodded toward the gate. "Cut it." A man stepped forward, bolt cutters in hand, but before he could snip the chain, something caught his eye, a piece of paper tacked to the wooden post beside the gate. Weathered, but legible, written in neat, steady handwriting. "Trespassers will be fed to the coyotes." The men burst into laughter. One of them even took a picture. "He thinks he's some kind of cowboy." Salazar chuckled, shaking his head. "Old fool probably keeps a shotgun by the bed. We'll be done before he wakes up." They cut the lock and rolled through the gate, the lead SUV pulling up to the front of the house. It looked abandoned. Porch sagging, windows clouded with dust, a screen door swinging lazily in the breeze. A rocking chair creaked gently, moved by the wind. The men fanned out, weapons ready, though their confidence made them careless. Inside the first SUV, a young recruit named Mateo watched nervously. Something about the silence gnawed at him. The birds were gone. Not a single one chirped. Even the cattle had wandered to the far edge of the pasture. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" Salazar grunted. "Exactly." Salazar frowned but waved him off. "Get out and check the barn." The men obeyed. 3 of them approached the barn, boots crunching softly. The door stood slightly ajar. One of them pushed it open with the barrel of his rifle. The smell of oil and old hay drifted out. In the center of the dirt floor, nailed to a post, was another piece of paper, clean this time, almost new. It said, "You still have time to turn around." They stared at it, puzzled. Then laughed again, louder this time. Who writes notes like that? They didn't see the motion sensor light flicker briefly on the corner beam. Back near the porch, Salazar leaned against the SUV, lighting a cigarette. "Crazy old man," he muttered, exhaling smoke into the dry air. "We'll drag him out, send a message, and—" He stopped. A distant sound, faint but unmistakable, reached his ears. A metallic click, carried by the wind. The young recruit stiffened. That was— "Shut up," Salazar hissed, scanning the horizon. But there was no one there. Only the desert stretching wide and empty. He squinted toward the fence line, where heat shimmered like water. Nothing. Inside the brush 200 yards away, a scope tracked his every movement. The man behind it lay perfectly still, his heartbeat slow, his breathing steady. Jack Rains watched through the crosshairs, expression unreadable. They'd stepped onto his land. and they had no idea what kind of war they'd just started. Jack Rains didn't move at first. Years of training had conditioned him to let chaos come to him, not to rush toward it. From his vantage point in the scrub brush, he studied every movement through his thermal scope. Red silhouettes moved in the distance, the cartel men spreading across his land, some toward the barn, others fanning out behind the house. He counted them, 8 total, 3 by the vehicles, 3 near the barn, 2 checking the back fence line. That was 8 threats, 8 targets, and a dozen ways this could go wrong. But Jack didn't think in wrong or right. He thought in survival. The land around him wasn't just a farm. It was a system, a living fortress disguised as dust and wire. Every inch had been measured, every line of sight calculated. Years ago, when he first bought the property, he'd wired it with silent sensors, motion detectors from old military surplus, repurposed cameras hidden in birdhouses, tripwires made from fine fishing line. What had started as a hobby, a way to keep his hands busy after retirement, had become something else, preparation. He adjusted his rifle, the old suppressed Remington 700 resting steady on a flat rock. The first target, the one by the water tank, was easy. The man had wandered off alone, probably to take a piss. Jack breathed in, let it out, and squeezed. The crack was muted, more of a cough than a shot. The man folded instantly, crumpling into the dust without a sound. The others didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, yelling, scattering across his property like children who thought they owned the world. Jack shifted slightly, sliding down the ridge. His movements were silent, deliberate, boots brushing over sand and dry grass, never breaking a twig. His dog tags clinked softly beneath his shirt, the only sound that belonged to him. When the second one went down, it wasn't from a bullet. Jack had built a trap by the corral gate, a simple wire stretched between 2 fence posts at knee height. The man tripped, stumbled forward, and hit the ground hard. Before he could rise, a weighted sandbag swung from a pulley Jack had rigged, knocking him out cold. Non-lethal, but effective. He wouldn't wake up for hours. Jack crouched low behind an old tractor, scanning the rest. The adrenaline had kicked in now, that familiar electricity he hadn't felt since the Black Ops missions overseas. He hated that it still thrilled him. The precision, the focus, the way the world narrowed to a single purpose. He had sworn to leave this life behind. But you can't unlearn being a predator. Near the barn, the 3 remaining men had found the second note he left. They were laughing again, one of them pulling out his phone to take a picture. That gave Jack time. He circled wide, moving through a narrow ditch, emerging behind them. He could smell the hay, hear the low hum of flies. The closest man turned slightly, and Jack struck, one swift motion, the butt of his rifle slamming into the man's neck. He dropped without a sound. Jack caught his rifle before it hit the ground. The other 2 reacted too late. One raised his gun, firing wildly into the barn. The sound shattered the calm, echoing off the hills. Jack dropped to one knee, sighted through the rifle, and shot once. The gunman's weapon flew from his hand as he screamed and fell backward. The last one froze, torn between running and shooting. Jack's voice cut through the silence like steel. "Don't," he said. The man turned, saw him, and bolted anyway. Jack let him go. There was no point wasting a round on someone who'd already learned fear. The survivor stumbled toward the SUVs, shouting something in Spanish. Panic rippled through the others. Now they knew. Jack retreated into the shadows again, heart steady. He'd been in ambushes before. Panic always came first, then recklessness. And reckless men were easy prey. He swapped the rifle for a sidearm, a custom Glock he'd carried since his Delta days, and moved toward the house. He needed to push them away from his livestock, keep the fight contained. Salazar, the leader, was barking orders now, trying to regain control. "Spread out. Find him." Jack smirked under his breath. "You already did." He triggered another trap, this one a noisemaker. A small propane canister rigged to pop when tripped. It went off near the far fence, sending a sharp crack echoing across the property. The cartel members spun toward the noise, firing blindly. Jack moved in the opposite direction, silent, invisible. By the time the gunfire stopped, only 4 of them were still standing. The others were unconscious, bleeding, or gone. The survivors gathered by the SUVs, desperate to regroup. Salazar's face was pale, eyes darting across the horizon. "This ain't no farmer," he muttered. From somewhere behind them, a voice answered, calm, steady, close. "No," Jack said, "it's not." They turned, but he was already gone, melting into the desert again. The land had turned on them. And Jack Rains was its weapon. By the time the sun began to sink behind the jagged hills, the desert had gone eerily quiet again. The dry wind carried only the faint smell of gunpowder, gasoline, and blood. The black SUVs stood abandoned, one with its doors open, another still idling with music playing softly, a Mexican ballad that had long since lost its meaning in the empty air. Crows had started to gather on the fence posts, waiting. Jack Rains stepped out from the shadows of his barn, his movements calm, almost methodical. His rifle hung loosely by his side, the barrel smudged with dust. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. He knew exactly how many were left. Years of battlefield instinct had taught him to count the living as precisely as he counted the dead. 1. Miguel, El Lobo, Ortega himself had come at the end, furious, proud, unable to believe that one old man could wipe out half his crew. He'd arrived in a separate car, armed and loud, calling out in broken English for the gringo to show himself. But now, Ortega wasn't yelling anymore. He was crawling. Jack found him by the dry riverbed, dragging himself through the sand toward the last SUV. The man's expensive jacket was torn, one sleeve dark with blood. His pistol was gone. He looked back over his shoulder and froze when he saw the figure approaching, a tall silhouette outlined by the dying light. "Stop," Ortega rasped, raising a trembling hand. "You don't understand." Jack didn't stop. He kept walking, boots crunching softly over the gravel. There was no hate in his expression, no anger, just that cold, professional calm that Ortega recognized too late. It was the look of a man who'd seen this scene 100 times before, and never once lost. "You picked the wrong ranch," Jack said finally, his voice low, carrying over the wind. "And the wrong old man." Ortega's mouth twisted into a sneer, but his eyes betrayed him. "You think this changes anything? My people will come. You can't fight them all." Jack stopped a few feet away, the setting sun painting his face in copper and shadow. "You're right," he said simply. "But I don't have to fight them all. Just the ones dumb enough to step foot on my land." For a moment, they just stared at each other, predator and prey, though neither quite knew which was which anymore. Jack slid a shell into the chamber of his shotgun, the sound clicking like a clock ticking down to inevitability. Ortega tried to push himself up, his breath ragged. "Who the hell are you?" Jack tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether to answer. "Used to be nobody. Used to be Delta." That word landed like a hammer. Ortega's eyes went wide. He'd heard of them. Ghosts, men who appeared in the dead of night, left only bodies behind. Suddenly the note at the gate, the precision, the traps, it all made sense. Jack lifted the shotgun, leveling it calmly. Ortega raised a hand again, voice shaking. "Wait, I can pay you. I can make you rich. You walk away, no one ever comes here again." Jack's face didn't change. "I already am rich," he said softly. "Got peace, got land, got quiet. I don't sell that." The silence that followed stretched long and thin. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, a ghostly sound rolling over the hills. Then came the single report of the shotgun, deep and final. The echo chased the wind, scattering the crows into flight. Jack lowered the weapon slowly. He stood there for a while, staring at the body, not out of satisfaction. There was never satisfaction, but out of a kind of weary acceptance. Killing was never hard for him. Living after was. He turned back toward the farmhouse, his shadow long across the dirt. The adrenaline had burned off now, leaving behind only the ache in his shoulders and the ringing in his ears. He passed the barn where the first men had fallen, the corral where the horses still stood, nervous but unharmed. He murmured something low and soothing to them, the way he always did after a storm. On the porch, his coffee cup from that morning still sat where he'd left it, a ring of dried grounds at the bottom. He picked it up, studied it for a moment, then set it down again. The stillness felt heavier now, not peace, but aftermath. He wiped his hands on his jeans, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked out over the land that had just been baptized in fire. The stars were beginning to appear, sharp and bright. Somewhere out there, the rest of Ortega's men would learn what had happened. Maybe they'd come, maybe they wouldn't. It didn't matter. Jack had been hunted before. He'd buried worse than them. He sat down in his rocking chair, the boards creaking beneath him. The shotgun rested across his lap, the night air cooling the sweat on his skin. For a long time, he just listened, to the wind, to the faint hum of the desert, to the quiet that was his again. Tomorrow, he'd fix the fence, patch the bullet holes, maybe ride into town for supplies. Life would go on, same as always. But for now, under that endless stretch of New Mexico sky, Jack Rains let the silence settle back into place, and for the first time in years, it felt like home.